All right, welcome everyone to the Champion Provider Fellowship webinar, Championing Park Equity. I'm Nancy, the project manager for the fellowship. I'm going to hand it off to Wakata to do our land acknowledgement.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Agatha Summer. I'm the director of the Champion Provider Fellowship. I'd like to start us off with our land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Ramaytush Ohlone elders, past, present, and future, who call this place, the land that UCS sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Ramaytush Ohlone community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding.
I will go over some housekeeping before we begin. Everyone will be muted throughout the course of the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat box to write them down. We'll be monitoring the chat box. The webinar will be recorded and posted on our website by next week. For best viewing, we recommend using your computer audio and maximizing your Zoom screen. And if any point you are having any technical difficulties, please message me, Nancy. And I will also go over our upcoming events. We have our 2025 onboarding and mini college next month on June 11th and 12th in Sacramento. We will be onboarding our 6th cohort of fellows this year. We also have our August Works in Progress call, August 14th. And then we have our quarterly LHD check-in August 21st. And then we will also be hosting an in-person media training Thursday, September 24th in Oakland, which is all day for fellows. Yeah. Hand it over to Wakata to introduce our presenter today.
Hi, thank you, Nancy. I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar presenter, Michaela Randolph, who serves as a technical assistance consultant for the Children in Nature Network. In this role, she uses her skills to support communities, school districts, and cities to equitably connect children to nature. This could be through green schoolyards policies and schoolyard transformations, also elevating green stormwater infrastructure. Her work centers at the intersection of children's health and well-being in the environment. The goal is to ensure all communities are able to thrive. Michaela has over 15 years of experience working internationally, nationally, and locally on a myriad of urban and social policy issues. And with that, thank you so much, Michaela, for presenting for us today. And you've been a great partner with the Champion Provider Fellowship and always truly enjoy when you come to speak with us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be invited back and to share some information with folks. So hi again, I am Michaela Randolph, and I'm going to be kind of talking about championing park equity. I think in recent years, I've kind of worked more so on the perimeter of these issues. But I think for California, if you're to think about the landscape, we really don't have a lot of opportunities to build new parks. So there's some different ways to think about how you increase park access. And so I'll kind of like go over some of that information throughout the presentation. So I'm here representing the Children in Nature Network. I'm a consultant to the organization, and this is a national nonprofit organization that believes that nature has the power to make children healthier, happier, and smarter. And you can find out more about the organization at the website. And I think it goes without saying, and this has been somewhat exacerbated in the context of the pandemic and so many school closures and, just the way of life. But there's this crisis facing children around the world where we are programming them away from nature, right? There's more opportunities to disengage with nature than there are to engage with the natural world, many of that being driven by the uptick in use of screens and the frequency and time percentage of time that children are often spent, and adults often also, like in our current moment, in front of screens, as opposed to the and also being indoors, like kind of predicated a lot on safety issues. And so there's less time outdoors, less time engaging with nature, and really understanding what that means from a health perspective. So the basic theory of change here is to foster the belief that nature connection is critical for children's healthy development, and using evidence-based tools and research to make that case, and also to change the core systems that impact children's daily lives through place-based strategies, policies, partnerships, and experiences, and basically to grow the movement. So currently this week actually is the Children in Nature Network Conference happening in St. Paul, Minnesota, where over 600 people have gathered from across the country and the world, honestly, to explore different ways that we can work to engage more children in nature. So I'm just like, it's been a while since I've given a presentation to the Champion Providers Fellows. It was maybe in 2022, maybe in person, but the last webinar was pre-COVID, I think in 2019. So some of this, I'm going to contextualize it in a post-COVID context, but what we've been seeing throughout the pandemic and then also afterwards is this increase in childhood obesity and diabetes rates, increase in social isolation. So like still we see in many children and even adults just not being able to feelings of being social isolation and not being able to make those meaningful connections. So which comes through social cohesion, right? Feeling like you are part of a community. There's an increased interest in park utilization. Obviously, we saw like during the pandemic, while many people were shuttered in, those people that had access to parks, whether that be regional park, national park, state parks, et cetera, were really utilizing like a lot of trails and paths and just park space, because we all knew from the data that being outside was better than being inside close to people. And so that really was kind of the entry point, and it really shifted, I think, in many ways, practices, but also the political sphere around how important park spaces are. And then also these like local only parks policies were put into place because it really exacerbated kind of the disparities between communities that had parks and communities that didn't have parks. So obviously, if you didn't have a park nearby and you were going into another neighborhood to experience some outdoor space, so it really kind of just brings to fact that ideally we all should be having some sort of park space in adjacent proximity, in close proximity to us. And then also this highlight of vacant or underutilized schoolyards. And what does that mean, right? So I'm also going to touch on, in addition for me, with regards to kind of park equity, I'll touch on kind of green schoolyards and the concept of safe routes to parks, and also share some case studies. So again, just to clarify, green schoolyards are kind of a critical component to the work, because if you think about many places where you might live, work, and or play, there's probably not a lot of opportunities to build a brand new park, but there are schools within communities. And so there is this opportunity to open up those schoolyards to the adjacent community during non-school hours, and even better if those schoolyards are green. So the Children in Nature Network is currently working on a Green Schoolyards Action Agenda to increase equitable access to nature's benefits in schoolyards across the country. We're going to be starting some work on an update to that work. But the vision is that all U.S. communities offer access to green schoolyards by 2050 to enhance children's healthy development, community well-being, and positive environmental impacts. So if you're to think about the state of schoolyards today, one word that would be probably pretty prevalent, and I think really is applicable to many schoolyards I've seen throughout California, is asphalt, right? So there's not enough play area to engage all children during recess. It's not designed for hands-on learning outdoors. It does not emote excitement or motivate kids to want to come to school. And the lack of green space equals increased temperatures outside, and higher cooling costs inside the school. And so when we talk about temperature surface, if you look at the picture that's on the slide, obviously you see a interestingly placed play equipment and then a large swath of asphalt, which really doesn't, encourage play or innovation or ingenuity in any way. So asphalt replacement and repair cost money to replace that asphalt, and there's some lost benefits also. When it comes to increasing permeable surfaces. So when we think about our urban environments in particular, it's really important for us to think about stormwater management, and the opportunity for stormwater management on school grounds. And one of the ways that we get there is by increasing the permeability of the surfaces. So no water is going to be able to go through that asphalt. It's just going to run off and be lost somewhere. But if this playground, school ground was actually made more permeable, there'd be this really great opportunity to capture stormwater and either store it to increase local water supply, or and reuse it, for landscaping purposes or what have you. And then, or just to clean it, depending on like the infiltration methodologies or best management practices. You could store it or you can clean it so that the water quality is improved. And in areas where it snows, there's an increased cost for snow plowing asphalt. Sorry, just kidding. Oop, all over the place. Stop touching things. Um, all right, and then obviously when there's no permeable surfaces, there's increased flooding and the inability to use the space for multiple periods of time. So just want to kind of give you that context. This is the same schoolyard. This is actually based in Chicago, Illinois, and it's a completely transformed schoolyard that was designed in collaboration with not only the school community, parent community, teachers and staff, but also the community beyond. It sits right in the middle of the neighborhood with no neighboring parks. And so you can already tell just the difference here, right? It's much more interesting space. It's not only centered around playground equipment, it also offers opportunities for outdoor learning. And what we've learned about green schoolyards specifically is that when you see green, like even just a view of trees or green spaces, helps to reduce stress levels and increase mental health. That also works for like healing. This research has been done in hospital settings as well. There's increase in academic performance. There's an increase in enrollment, increased student attention and attendance, increase in family and community engagement, which is really important. I also often say that schools in many ways offer a very finite community. So you just have like students maybe entering in kindergarten or pre-K, and then they graduate at fifth grade, right? So even if you have an engaged parent for a period of time, once that student graduates, it's a probably pretty high probability that you're going to lose that engagement. And so what's really important is community engagement, because the people who live in that community are probably living there for decades, and they're seeing all the students pass through, but they're there. So that community engagement really, in my opinion, brings more added value to a school space like this, because you're engaging beyond the school community. When there's more trees, that's automatically cooling. If you put trees near buildings, that's going to help to lower energy costs for cooling the building, because then you'll have more shade. But also when you have more trees outside, you're able to cool the school grounds, allow students to actually engage in outdoor learning, bringing learning from inside the four walls of a classroom and beyond. And then there's all this other research, and I'm happy to drop infographics or provide infographics at a later date that really make the connection between academic performance, play, mental health, and green schoolyards. And when the schoolyard is available for use throughout the year and in different weather conditions, then this just adds value to that initial investment. So what is a green schoolyard? In many ways, we try not to be incredibly prescriptive because it's going to look different, at each, you could be in the same school district and what the green schoolyards look like will differ. But in short, a green schoolyard is a nature-filled, multifunctional school ground designed for and by students, teachers, parents, and community members that offer spaces to play, learn, explore, and grow. And during out of school time, so some programs have before school care or after school care, green schoolyards are ideally open for community use, increasing access to nearby parks and improving the health and well-being of surrounding communities. So in places like San Francisco, they can say they have a 10-minute walk to a park. I think they were one of the first cities that said they had a 10-minute walk to a park because not only did they have park space, but they also have school grounds that are open to community. So they can include any of the following, not necessarily all of them, but outdoor classrooms, native and pollinator gardens, stormwater capture, traditional play equipment, nature play areas, edible gardens, trails, trees, etc. Sometimes we'll see schools that are like located closer to more forested area. And so, it's like, how do you make the connection from like your proximity to nature, to a forest, to trail, and really bring that and integrate that as part of the school day and school experience. So there's kind of these steps that we have on this process map for building successful and sustainable green schoolyards. This is not necessarily linear, but a lot of case making for why this type of intervention would be important. We have a lot of making the case. We also encourage securing funding, which can look different, but I can talk a little bit about that specifically in the California context. Identifying policies to help to get things started and or sustain the movement. Building partnerships is key. And then if you were to move forward and you've got kind of these things moving in any kind of category of these, then you can start designing the schoolyard, thinking about activating that space for learning, ensuring that teachers and staff feel comfortable bringing students out into that newly renovated schoolyard. I think often what happens, and maybe some of you on the call may or may not have some of this experience, but if something is new, we tend to like want to preserve or protect it and not to use it. And when we don't use it, then we lose a lot of the benefits of what that space can be designed and function for. And then there's some tips on just managing the space and evaluating the impact. And a lot of these kind of toolkit information is available on our website. I would just say for the California context in terms of securing funding, I think in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, um, the California Natural Resource Agency announced a $150 million investment for green schoolyards, and that was for planning and implementation grants across the state. That was the first, from my knowledge, kind of state level program that offered funding for green schoolyards. And that grant funding has been administered through CAL FIRE, so California Urban Fire and Forestry Department. And so it's just something to track. Like if you're interested, I probably can drop a link after I'm done screen sharing of the grantees that have been awarded Green Schoolyard grants so that you all can find out where this is happening in your community. So I just want to share that. And then there's a myriad of benefits for green schoolyards. If you look at the outer rung of this ring, we have these 4 categories of community, health and wellness, learning, and environment. And then if you move inward, what you'll see is kind of an overlap. So it's not just the silo of like, oh, environment and learning. You could have a collaboration when you talk about environmental literacy, then you are merging kind of those opportunities of the benefits of environment and also learning, right? And then again, if you're looking at community and health and wellness, thinking about the mental health or knowing the mental health benefits of green schoolyards helps you to get to that. If you're thinking about environment and community, stormwater management, which I mentioned earlier, helps you to kind of make those cases for the different benefits. So this is the benefits wheel. We have it as a separate standalone document if folks are interested in delving a little bit deeper on this. And one of the key things we really try to encourage is like any learning can happen outdoors. Any learning can happen in a green schoolyard space when the green schoolyard is designed as an outdoor classroom. And that can be very bare bones. A lot of this work has been inspired by some work in Berlin, Germany, where children are spending, time outdoors the majority of the day. They're engaging in nature, but you can learn any subject outside, right? So, and a big barrier, I would say, to getting teachers outside is that comfort level, right? And so there needs to be actually some professional development dollars to help facilitate a teacher's comfort level with moving the classroom outdoors, because anyone who's like been in a classroom setting understands that there's all these competing priorities, and classroom management is a big thing. So there's a fear a little bit about, oh, well, I'll lose control of the class if I take them outside. And actually, to the contrary, students may be initially excited, but they actually are more engaged or learning more when you take them outside. So that's something we really try to stress. So I'm just going to go into a few case studies. There's a San Francisco Green Schoolyards program. They had a whole Green Schoolyards manager. I think one, I will just be candid and say, sometimes what happens when really good work is happening and we're moving in the right direction as a field, sometimes, a school district might lose funding, which means a staff person might, be let go because then this isn't seen as a district priority. I often work with a lot of school districts, and I really encourage them to adopt policy that helps them to sustain not only the position, but the work and kind of the values and vision of what they're trying to do in order to educate students. So there's several living schoolyards. This one features raised garden beds, and this campus actually has chickens, which is such a great learning opportunity for students around life cycle and all of these things. So this is in Oakland, a schoolyard that I remember visiting actually pre-pandemic. And so there's all these learning opportunities when we talk about taking the learning from the outside in. Often upper grades, like fifth graders in the elementary school level, will have so much that they can tell you about what's happening on their schoolyard. And it's just a higher level of engagement. We also did some work in the Central Valley. I did some work specifically in the Central Valley. We were looking at this particular garden space and thinking about, I believe this is in Stockton actually, and we were thinking about because the school was dealing with a lot of like transient communities, like meaning a lot of families came in, but they at the beginning of the school year, but maybe they didn't finish the school year. So while they're there, what are the ways that we can kind of provide one, restorative justice opportunities? And so just by bringing students outside into fresh air, into green spaces, there's just this opportunity to kind of diminish or decrease like these heightened levels of emotion by kind of like restoring and resetting their energy levels, and also thinking about faculty and staff, right, who are dealing with students all day. What are the opportunities for them to find that mental health restoration opportunities on the school ground, right? So if you think about schools, many students themselves probably spend 6 to 9 hours potentially there, and faculty, staff, administrators could be spending at least that time, if not a little bit more, on the school ground. So really thinking about how's that space also helping to nurture some mental health benefits feels really important. So now I'm going to shift us over into this concept of safe routes to parks, which is not work that the Children in Nature Network leads, but really is led by an amazing organization called Safe Routes Partnership. And so this is really about connecting the community to quality parks. And sometimes the barrier to getting to a quality park space is not that the park doesn't exist in a community, but it really might be the path of travel. Do I only have to take a car in order to get there? That might not be the most accessible route. What are ways that I can increase walking or biking to that park space? Is there an accessible route for seniors or elders that are in the community that can also get the benefits of these park spaces, right? So when we talk about equity, really talking about access, and we're talking about access for whom. And ideally, we want to be as inclusive as possible and thinking about every, kind of sector of the community being able to have access to these benefits. So, in this, graphic, you just have some um, thing around marking some images rather around marking the park, marking the routes. So installing maps, signs, different places so that the park really feels like it functions for every level. So I'll just delve a little bit into this work. So key components of Safe Routes to Parks. It kind of follows the model of Safe Routes to School for those of you who might be more familiar with that work, but is to engage community, to assess the state of the park or park facilities, to plan in collaboration with community to implement any key changes, and to think through sustainability of this work through partnerships, ideally with the community and local districts. So there's a couple of case studies. There is this in Planeta, California. There is this underutilized park that really struggled with vandalism and crime and didn't have any restrooms. So imagine that you wanted to, go to the park and God forbid you had to use the restroom and there's just no restrooms. I'm like, even just like that experience, right? So really thinking about the user experience. And in this community, they did a really phenomenal job of engaging community, both in English and Spanish. So obviously making sure that as you're doing community engagement, that there is that you're doing that in the language that feels most comfortable for the community as an access point. And so from this engagement, they were able to understand some of the barriers and challenges of using the park, and then ultimately think through park improvements. And a lot of this, work is predicated on the opportunity when funding comes. So it could be a local park measure that community votes for and says, we really don't like the state of our parks. We feel like parks are really important and vital to the community. And so that's like one way you might see park improvements. Most recently, we had the passage of Proposition 4, which is our climate bond. And so, there's some opportunities to think through how do you create a park that's more climate resilient. So more trees, more permeable surfaces, more shading, because when we think about our hottest days, we really want to make sure that where people are seeking respite are places that actually, offer respite, right? So like you don't want to go to a park that has like no trees and no shading, and it's just like all the benches are out in the hot sun. But if you're able to like put more trees, increase the green space, then that actually lends itself to cooling benefits. And so people in the community are able to reap those benefits. This is an exciting story. I probably should have provided an updated picture, but this is in Houlihan Park, which this funds were awarded, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019, and then no, they applied for the grant in 2019 and then were notified of funds being awarded in 2020. And then I think they recently celebrated the ribbon cutting in 2022 of this park. And so this really was a community engagement effort with partnership from Cultiva Salud, a nonprofit organization in the community. And they submitted this planning grant to support kind of the community priorities, like what did the community want to see in this park space? And so they received that large state grant. And so now this park space is actually open for community. So if folks are familiar with this community and where it is, then you all have a brand new park. I haven't had the benefit of seeing kind of like the brand new park, but it just really does speak to key partnerships having already engaged community. When we talk about community engagement, it's not like, oh, I have this great idea or I have this funding opportunity. Sometimes you just engage with community even before funding is available, right? Just I often talk about not having a transactional relationship with communities. So not going into communities and saying, oh, like, well, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. Instead, just show up to their meetings and hear and listen, like what is feeling important, what are the issues that are coming to the top. And I think it goes, I don't want to be remiss in naming that the current culture that we're in, political climate that we are currently in, and how sometimes that in and of itself, when you talk about kind of immigration and who belongs or what's happening, how that in itself can also be a barrier to utilizing park space. And so I just want to be really candid and honest that there are true challenges that communities face, and it looks a little bit different in every community. But I think you have to like honor and meet people where they are and be authentic in your engagement of like, okay, this is what I'm hearing. This may not be the best time to, suggest something new because the community is already laden with so many different things. So just wanted to be aware and highlight that. So what are the roles that you all can provide what are the roles that you all can play as providers? So one, just kind of belaboring this point on engagement, if you are aware of like meetings, coalition meetings, convenings that might be happening in your community that you serve, I think when you have time, it would be great for you just to like be in that space. Like you have such an important perspective as providers, and such a credible voice because you see the data, you're seeing patients, you're seeing so many of like what's going on, and ideally you would be a trusted voice in that community. And I think as you build trust, and I often say, like, let's move at the speed of trust, especially when you're entering new spaces, especially when you're talking about communities of color, when you might be, like engaging in a community that might be a little apprehensive of newcomers. I think just moving at the speed of trust and building trust with that community feels really important. And as you're building trust, then you can elevate your perspective as a provider. I also think, you all could be great conveners of partners. Again, just using your ability as a trusted voice and um, a trusted voice and that trusted data and that your ability to convene different partners and a diversity of partners. I think the health um, lens is such an important lens to be held and is often seen as somewhat of a neutral lens, right? Because I think in many cases, but then I reflect back to RFK and his whole testimony yesterday. But in many cases, I think it's really important to elevate your voice as like working in the best interest of health outcomes for that community. And so in that aspect, I think you are really good in terms of convening partners and then tapping into existing resources to engage some of those key stakeholders. So I've shared quite a few resources already in this presentation. And again, I'm happy to share those links with folks. But I think being able to know who are the key partners that are doing good work in your community. So if that's engaging, park community like, park foundations and just elevating your role in that way, that feels really important. And just knowing where those resources live so that you can also be a messenger to the community when needed. And so sometimes people are like, well, what can we do? You as a provider can definitely write an op-ed around certain things that you're seeing and the importance of kind of like park space, lack of access to park space, any like local chatter you might hear around what's happening or what might have happened. I think we have sometimes a lot of tension around park space and like our unhoused population, and those are real issues too that need to be like explored and figuring out how we come to some conclusion around that. And then lifting up like park access and park equity with your colleagues, so just like in conversation when we talk about park prescriptions and the opportunity to like prescribe nature and time outdoors, like one of the biggest assets you could possibly have is just knowing the park network, right? And what is available in your community or what is available to the community that you serve. And being able to say, yes, I'm writing you this park prescription to go spend some time outdoors. But if you're not aware of some of those challenges and barriers to what the lived experience of that community is, then like I think that's when I talk about community engagement and engaging in spaces even without wanting something back, just so that you can hear firsthand, like, oh wow, I didn't know that they're constantly finding needles on the playground, right? Which is awful. So just like really grounding yourself in some of the local knowledge, specifically around the community that you serve, I think that makes you as a provider at least feel or like more authentic in your engagement. And then I think authenticity also builds trust. So I'm almost sure that's my last slide. Yeah. So that's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. I hope this was helpful. And thank you again for the opportunity. And I can stop screen sharing.
Hi, Michaela. Yeah, definitely. This was absolutely really helpful. Thanks so much for the presentation. We have some time for questions. I did see one come through the chat, and I think you've addressed this. You were mentioning someone was interested in access to the studies that you used and references so that they could kind of read and reference them as they try to champion this topic.
Yeah, I'm happy to send links. I'll send an email with like important links and like the infographics, and then you can share it with the attendees. So I'm happy to do that. And then
Oh, great, wonderful.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yes, and then someone asked about the copy of the slides, and we've posted them after the webinar. So we will post that. We'll post the webinar recording as well in about a week. And then there are a couple of questions as well. And so the first one was, what actions would you suggest for researchers in this area as to best support the growth and development of the movement?
Yeah, I mean, I know I touched on a few different things. I mean, research is so key, and I know a lot of research is also kind of being attacked in terms of funding. And so I think that finding more examples of like where research actually or the data actually is driving policy change. So like most recently, the US Forestry Service has been doing some research around pavement, like the amount of like paved surfaces on school grounds. And so being able just to have that information feels like really important. I also, in my other job with Green Schoolyards America, we have a tree canopy equity map. So one, just like there's a lot of research kind of happening in this area and a lot of resources that have been developed as a result. And so I think just being aware of some of those resources, I'll share again post this session, the tree canopy equity map that Green Schoolyards America developed along with the report. And that is a statewide tool, which is really great. So you can actually look at any schoolyard within K through 12. I'm not sure if we have early childhood included in that, but you can look at any schoolyard and you can see the percentage of tree canopy right on that campus. And that's referencing back, I think, to 2022 or 2023 data. So unless something like has happened in more recent years, then that data is going to be, pretty up to date. And so I think just being able to like have the data to tell the story, to make the case, to move the needle on this feels really important. So I think sharing research, like I don't want the research to like stay in the scientific journals and in the health journals, right? Like, but really being able to attend all the conferences and just share, the good work that you all have been doing feels really important. And do you want to do this other question?
Oh, yeah. The other question was, how can we as providers facilitate communication and connection with the medical community? So I think here you touched a lot on sort of that community engagement, and this sounds like that kind of peer within the medical community engagement. Any suggestions to facilitate that?
Yeah, I mean, you all are probably more familiar with like how to engage with your medical community than I would be, but I think in many ways through relationships, I'm very big on relationships. So I think as you're talking to your colleagues or what have you, and you kind of gauge interest, maybe you bring this up in conversation. If you're already providing park prescriptions, maybe asking, oh, are you also providing park prescriptions? Like, what have you heard? Like checking in with them. And then maybe as you kind of get whatever feels like a critical mass to you, it could be 5, 10, 15, whatever. Then I think you maybe put yourself in a position to be like, well, maybe we should come together and start having some conversations, in community with each other about what we're seeing and what you'd like to see more of. I think that's something that comes to mind for me, but I really feel like you all are probably more experts in this area of like convening with your colleagues.
I mean, I love the idea of just starting before there's funding, like really starting to have these conversations, understand what the issues are, and as healthcare providers being able to bring in that perspective is definitely an added asset that y'all can bring. Any other, and feel free to continue to type the questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll be able to unmute you if you'd like to ask a question or comment. I think as we're seeing if there are any other questions from the group or attendees, I'll just maybe build a little bit on something I think you touched on sort of towards the end in terms of ParkRx and wondering if you could elaborate on that. I think you sort of talked about how you can kind of think more about almost ParkRx plus, like we have a lot of fellows and folks who've been engaged in ParkRx, but really sort of sounds like understanding the barriers to being able to see the success in those programs and people to actually access them has a lot of added benefit. And I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to share on how you've seen those programs enhanced in any way to really address barriers to access. And
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I actually don't feel like I'm super equipped to like talk to any barriers because I've been like pretty much on the periphery of like ParkRx. I think like conceptually and in theory, like I really love the idea. And I mean, I go to the doctor frequently enough, and like my provider's never provided like a park prescription. And I wish it was just more of an uptick. And I don't know. I think, if we're to think about the population that you serve and thinking through the most vulnerable population, so maybe folks that, might be like on our state medical system, like Medi-Cal or Medicaid or what have you. I think it seems like in theory again, that would be a great audience, right? That would be something that you could potentially track and such a great audience for, there might be receptivity, there because you're coming to the doc, especially like well child visits or wellness visits, not when someone is like urgent, like an emergency or urgent care, but really, just during those like, oh, I just came for my regular checkup. I think having the opportunity to, kind of understand where they are. I'm thinking of a personal experience in which like I have been feeling that my providers have actually been spending a good amount of time with me, which has been really impressive. And I also know that sometimes providers don't have a lot of time, right? And so in that short amount of time, like how can you get the messages that you want them to take away? But I mean, like the opportunity to just like go outside in a safe space, and if the one question could be asked, like, what would be the barrier, or do you have a park near you or a trail near you that feels safe? Would you, just once a week even take a walk, right? And just trying to meet people where they are. I mean, I know that can be a challenge because you all have so many other things to manage during that interaction, but I think just little things like that.
Yeah, I love that idea of just sort of a very simple question that could open up the door to getting a lot of information just from that answer. Kind of similarly to how we sort of think about our very brief food insecurity screeners and trying to kind of have these very quick entryways into understanding the challenges that our patients are facing.
Yeah.
We have another question that came in as well. So one, a request for the grantee list that I think you mentioned you provide. And then the other question is, what avenues do organizations have to best communicate their work to their community, but also to policymakers to make the shifts necessary?
Yeah, great question, and thank you. So I think it just depends on where you are, but I've given like testimony in front of like the education committee at the state level. So I think one, building relationships with your representatives or with the representatives for the communities that you serve feel really important. Again, I feel like you all are respected members of community, and I don't want you all to take that lightly. I mean, you have such a trusted voice, such an important voice in community. So to have, a doctor come and provide testimony around something, even to a committee, it doesn't have to be like, the whole state senate or something, but even just like identifying those key committees that might be valuable, understanding, kind of looking at the agenda and start understanding what are some of the issues that are coming up. But again, so let me circle back. So building relationships with your state assembly elected officials, whether that be a state senator or state assembly member, are really important. Just knowing, one, who represents you, simple things like just going to their website and kind of seeing what they talk about on their pages, looking at the staff list and seeing like, oh, do they have like a health person, or do they, sometimes it's like a sustainability person or someone who's like doing multiple roles, but like outreach to that person, and say, hey, I'm interested in having a brief conversation. Sometimes you'll get 15 minutes. You'd be amazed what you can get, stated in 15 minutes. And then just start building that relationship. And they might call on you and say like, hey, we had a great conversation. Would you mind lending your voice, to this piece of legislation? Or you can help craft, help them craft legislation. The elected official will take ownership over it, but you will be an important voice, an important ally to moving that work forward. I will say, like at this education committee meeting that I went to last year and provided testimony, and that was my first time, and I was really nervous because I was like, what are we doing? And so I think in that committee, there was a lot of issues that came up around extreme heat, and one of the families testified around kind of some legislation around physical education in extreme heat, and really needing some standardization around when you allow children to go outside, because they had, this family had lost their son, as a result of going outside on a really hot day and having to do strenuous activity. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so heartbreaking, and it shouldn't take something like that to get in front of the education committee. So I think, really watching the trends, I do quite a bit of work around extreme heat and looking at kind of those nature-based solutions as an answer. And so I think just like really knowing and acknowledging like this climate shift, we have drier, hotter periods, and then we're also having short, really intense periods of rain, which like cause so much, upheaval and damage and, loss of property, loss of life, type of things. And so I think as a provider, just even under, somehow bringing that knowledge into, the conversation with, folks that you are seeing also feels really important, or to the conversation with policymakers. So hopefully that's a helpful response.
Yeah, very helpful. We have time for a few more questions if anyone else has questions. One other question, just sort of picking up on that, I know we're in a very transitional time, but sort of anything to be aware of in terms of current policies that are happening around parks and green spaces that might be good to know about to advocate for in the current climate.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I did mention Proposition 4. I'm not sure voters overwhelmingly voted for Prop for, which is our climate bond. And in that bond, there is some language around nature-based solutions. And when we talk about climate, and I think I feel very fortunate that I am, from California, and we are really watch the data and understand how important it is to like acknowledge and address climate change and build more climate resilient communities. And so I think I would just caution against getting caught up in like, oh, this is all about solar and well, clean energy obviously is important, but also nature-based solutions are important, right? So more trees, increased tree canopy, breaking up permeable surfaces. So like when we see like streets and having to there's like a center median and seeing more like plants in that center median, a lot of people don't recognize like what that space is actually doing or how it should function is as a nature-based solution to capture and store stormwater. And ideally, it's also planted with native plants. So we're not in times of drought worried about like, oh, is this, green? Things aren't dead. They're just gone dormant because we are using native plants in those spaces. But when, we have periods of rain, that space is also serving to kind of capture and clean water, right? So those are in many ways some of the two biggest things. Obviously, we know wildfires are also, a big issue that we face as a state. And I think thinking through not villainizing nature, right? Like, oh no, we just have to harden the buildings and no, but if you look even I'm based in Los Angeles. I don't know if I said that before, but I'm based in LA. And so when we look at the most recent fires that happened in January in both the Palisades and the Altadena area, I mean, the trees in many ways, a lot of the greenery actually survived, and it was the buildings and the building materials are a lot of the things that fueled the fires. So there's a balance here in like not villainizing the benefits of what nature can bring. We've been like asking folks to just leave the trees alone in many ways and don't think just because it looks dead that it is dead, because it's honestly too early to tell. And I believe very strongly in nature's power to restore itself. And so we just need to give time for that to happen as opposed to just assuming or making a rash decision that, oh, this is no longer a value, so we're going to get rid of it. So I think there's just a balance with all of our climate stuff in particular to kind of not villainize nature, to really see it as a solution and a resource that we can learn and grow from. And like biodiversity, which I didn't talk about at all, but the ability to bring in new life, into our communities, be that through like birds and like pollinators and new species that we see pop up in our communities, that's really important, right? That's important from a physical health perspective as well as mental health, just to see a variety of different living things in our communities.
Absolutely. Thank you for some of those very current examples and just things that we can kind of wrap our head around and kind of understanding how, as even just community members, we can give voice to some of these issues. I think we're just about approaching time. There aren't any other questions, and thank you again so much, Michaela, for this presentation. Always wonderful to have you, and hope to have you back again in the future. And thank you to all of our attendees, our local health departments, our Champion Provider Fellows, some of our new fellows who were able to join as well. And yeah, looking forward to keeping the conversation going. Again, we'll be posting a recording of the webinar in about a week, so you can look out for that next week, as well as some resources that you all can reference, and let us know if you have any follow-up questions for us or Michaela.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.